give 1 more minute for people to join and then we can start.
Yeah. That's fine with me. Thank you.
D'accord, merci beaucoup. Just to mention that there is translation interpretation available for those who would want to join. Use interpretation both in English and in French. So we'll be starting in 1 minute time.
That's fine with me. Thank you.
Dear participants, just before we start, just to mention that if you want to access interpretation either in English or in French, please click on the interpretation icon at the bottom and you can then make a decision. Si vous voulez choisir traduction, il y a un icon d'interprétation des barres. You can pick. Vous pouvez cliquer et langage que vous voulez. Okay, Professor Ali, I think we can start now. Over to you, please.
Okay. Thank you very much. I would like to start by extending my thanks to UNECA, its executive secretary, and the whole team in charge of ADIF, that is Africa Development Impact Forum. Today's event is part of the sessions which are laid out towards the forum which is scheduled to take place in June, if I'm correct. So the main topic of today's webinar is about Africa's industries. Which industries should Africa prioritize over the coming decades in order to address the main the issues related to structural transformation, decent jobs, climate resilience, and the like. And this is a broad theme of this webinar. And we have some sub-themes which we expect our panelists to cover. And among those themes, the sub-themes, we have frontier technologies. Everyone knows that the world has entered the era of frontier technologies, the post-industrial era. And how can Africa thrive to play a central role in this new global era? So this is one sub-theme we expect our panelists to cover. The second sub-theme we would also expect our panelists to cover has to do with industries of the future. Okay, how can Africa break from its secular dependency on natural resources? How can Africa play a more important role in global value chain? And how can Africa mainstream its manufacturing, which still occupy a very tiny share of GDP? How can Africa mainstream its digital services and the like? So this is also an important sub-theme we expect our panelists to cover. Another sub-theme we expect our panelists to cover has to do with resilience. Everyone knows that climate change is hitting African countries much more than other regions of the world. And adaptation is a key issue because climate change is further jeopardizing African productive base in many different sectors, in the agricultural sectors, in the industry sectors, in many other sectors, even services like tourism, with the sea level rise. And climate change needs to be properly addressed. And how can we account for that also in dealing with industries of the future? The fourth sub-theme we'll have to cover relates to jobs. Everyone knows that over the last few decades, Africa has grown much more than many other regions of the world. But this growth has neither brought about a significant decrease in poverty, nor does it create decent job. Informality is rising, and poverty is also still a very big issue in Africa. According to recent estimates from the World Bank, up to 80% of the world extreme poor still live in Africa. So mainstreaming manufacturing in order to create better jobs and to reduce poverty is also a very important topic we need to address in this webinar. Last but not least, regional and spatial issues will need to be dealt with in this webinar. In particular, talking about CFTA as a means to develop more and better trade flows across the continent and to leverage its huge industrial potential. So these are the main issues we expect our panelists to cover today. For those who don't know me, I'm Professor Ahmadou Alimbai. I'm the president of the African Institute for Sustainable Development based in Dakar, Senegal, and also a non-resident fellow at the Brookings Institution. Before going any further, I would like to give the floor to Mrs. Karima Ben Sultan, who is my close neighbor in Dakar, Senegal. She's the director of ADIF, the Institute for Economic Development and Planning, for her to deliver some opening remarks before we proceed. So, Karima, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Professor, and dear participants. Good afternoon. Allow me just on behalf of Ms. Karima Bounembra Ben Sultan, the Director of IDEP, to convey her apologies. She had for unforeseen circumstances, she will not be able to be here with us now, but she tasked me to deliver the opening remarks on her behalf, which will be brief and bring a little bit of context regarding ADIF. My name is Flavia Ba, and I'm part of the team of the ADIF, the Africa Development Impact Forum, and I'm research officer at IDEP. So just to bring a little bit of context regarding ADIF, the Africa Development Impact Forum is a flagship initiative of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, and it will be launched on 11 June 2026. As the forum date approaches, the need for focused, results-driven action on jobs in Africa has become increasingly urgent. Convened under the theme Best Practices and Innovative Solutions for Job Creation in Africa, 2026 ADIF responds directly to this imperative and is strategically aligned with the 2026 Africa Business Forum, the recently concluded African Regional Forum on Sustainable Development, and most importantly, with the theme of the upcoming 2027 Conference of Ministers. ADIF, the forum, is positioned as ECA's flagship implementation platform, fully embedded within its delivery architecture. Its purpose is clear: to move decisively from policy dialogue to action, and drawing on the outcomes and guidance of the ECA statutory meetings, ADIF will prioritize implementation through a structured, multi-stage approach that translates evidence into measurable and accountable results. This being said, what are the objectives of ADIF? Firstly, ADIF is action-oriented at its core. It is designed to deliver concrete and implementable solutions aligned with Africa's long-term development priorities under Agenda 2063 and the Sustainable Development Goals. The forum deliberately shifts the focus away from abstract dialogue towards implementation. Its objective is to generate practical, evidence-based responses that can be translated into measurable and development outcomes for the continent. As a second objective, ADIF intends to serve as a platform for purposeful connection with a strong emphasis on youth engagement for this year's edition. It will bring together policymakers and decision makers, youth networks and innovators, the private sector, think tanks, and development partners within a single solution-oriented space. The forum is deliberately structured to amplify youth voices and bridge ideas with implementation. In doing so, it will foster intergenerational partnerships capable of delivering tangible, sustained development impact. Third objective, and from its inception, ADIF places impact at the center of its approach, grounded in evidence and results. It prioritizes solutions that have already demonstrated tangible impact across Africa, while at the same time critically examining the bottlenecks that continue to undermine effective policy delivery. Across the continent, proven models, credible research, and successful practices confirm that meaningful change is achievable. ADIF will elevate these high-impact solutions and actively support their replication and scale-up, accelerating development progress through approaches that deliver verifiable and sustained results. Now, on this pre-forum phase, what is the Stock Series webinars about as part of a co-creative process? ADIF is not a one-off event, but a journey from commitment to impact. It is unfolding through a clear, disciplined three-stage process designed to turn solutions into results. The first stage, the call to action, from which we already received 114 proposals, has set the pace by identifying high-potential, evidence-based solutions that are ready for implementation. The second stage, and this one during the forum itself, the policy hackathon, will bring diverse actors together to stress test these ideas, refine them, and prepare them for delivery, culminating at ADIF in June 2026. The third stage, which will be the post-forum one, the implementation clock, will ensure that action continues beyond the forum by tracking progress, supporting scale-up, and anchoring accountability. At the core of this journey, as today, are the StockTake webinars. These webinars are not just preparatory conversations, they are where the work begins. Over 6 months, they created and have been creating a space to confront real constraints, learn from what already works, and elevate solutions that can be implemented at scale. They build momentum, sharpen priorities to ground ADIF firmly in evidence, experience, and impact. Similarly to the preceding webinars, today's webinar, convened with the leadership of Macroeconomics, Finance, Governance, and Planning Division and the Brookings Institute, focuses on a social contract premise: industries of the future, transformative and labor-intensive sectors, and will these transformative and labor-intensive sectors bring decent and dignified jobs? For instance, the conversations held during the joint stakeholder town hall on shaping the post-2030 development agenda during the Africa Regional Forum for Sustainable Development offer the clear lenses for today's discussion on industries of the future. A central message from that dialogue was the need for a strong African common position, one that aligns the Pact for the Future with Agenda 2063 and delivers real opportunities for people, especially Africa's youth. During the town hall, stakeholders repeatedly emphasized that the future of development must be built through inclusive, intergenerational dialogue, and that young people cannot remain at the margins of economic transformation. This webinar speaks directly to that call. The industries of the future are not abstract concepts, they are the sectors that will determine whether Africa's rapidly growing youth population finds decent jobs, pathways to entrepreneurship, and a meaningful stake in the continent's development trajectory. There was also a strong call to shift power and resources closer to local actors, including youth-led enterprises, innovators, and communities. Industries of the future, particularly those linked to regional value chains and the AFCFTA, might offer a concrete entry point to operationalize this shift, enabling youth entrepreneurs to innovate, grow, and compete. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, today's conversation builds on that foundation by highlighting what already works, confronting what holds us back, and focusing on solutions that can be scaled. This webinar is therefore not only about envisioning the future, it is about equipping Africa's youth to shape it. Thank you very much once again, and on behalf of Ms. Ben Sultan, thank you and have a very fruitful discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Ba, for these very important framing and scoping remarks. Now we'll move to our next presentator, who is Mr. Stephen Karinji, Director of Macroeconomics, Finance, Governance, and Planning Division at UNECA. And Mr. Karinji will provide a context-setting remark. Some context-setting remarks before we proceed with our panel. Mr. Karinji, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Prof. It's good to see you. And once again, we want to thank Brookings Institution, to Pierre, through you, for collaborating with us on this. I basically had 4 slides, and incidentally, these 4 slides, if you can put them in the presentation mode, Gao Chao, please. These 4 slides seem to capture what you have said, Prof, and what Flavia has also said. Gao Chao, can you please put it in a presentation mode?
The screen is frozen. We are trying to doing it.
Okay, no problem. So if I go to the background that I have before you, I think the problem that, as we know it, is that we have very good research that we do in the continent. We also have very good policy design. If you go to most governments, you'll find that there are very good policies that have been designed. Now, the challenge seems to be the implementation of these policies and the actual delivery of the kind of results that we want. So that's the problem. And so ADIF, as you have heard both from Prof and from Flavia, what we are trying to do is how do we convert the evidence to measurable action, or at least the results that we can see through some implementation pathways. That's why the ECA conceived ADIF, and that's why you also see us working with think tanks like Brookings Institution or ASSET and other think tanks. Now, for this particular webinar, we want to focus on the industries of the future. And I think, Prof, you have highlighted some of the reasons why we want to do this. But I think the key thing is that what you should get from this background is that the choices that we are going to make today are actually going to shape Africa's industries of the future, how Africa grows, and the kind of jobs that are going to be created today and for the decades to come. Now, if we go to the next slide, we will see some numbers of what basically you have tried to say, Prof, the current situation within the continent as we know it. So we have this African economy that has actually been growing, but with very low productivity and very limited transformation. And we know most of the research shows, because most of this growth is actually driven by commodity dependence, and it's also driven by factor accumulations. So we end up with the economies that are full of informal employment. So if you look at the numbers, therefore, the continent as a whole, most of the employment, 85% of it is actually informal. And it's even worse for the least developed countries. And even where there has been growth, most of this growth actually has not been accompanied by jobs. And we have situations whereby because of underemployment, we have 145 million Africans who today are employed but are also living in extreme poverty. Our youth are not employed, they're not in school or even in any training institute. And according to the International Labour Organization, in 2024, there were 113 million people within the continent who are looking for jobs. Now, this situation is made even worse by the structural vulnerabilities that the African economies face today. We have a narrowing fiscal space. We have issues of poor energy security, poor food security, climate and geopolitical shocks. And so we need to have a resilient future for Africa. And this, again, must depend on the decisions that we make today. Because if we make good decisions, we are going to build industries for that future. But if we make bad decisions, we are likely to remain where we are with this kind of status or even regress. So going to the conceptual framing of the Africa's industries of the future, and this is what our panelists will be going deeper into. We don't want a situation whereby Africa is left behind in a global economy that is rapidly evolving and also digitalizing. And that's why we have this question of how do we build industries that take advantage of the frontier technologies and the robust and come up have a robust manufacturing base. The second point is how do we take advantage of the huge natural assets that we have as a continent to have a transformation? How do we do this by adding value, beneficiating on these natural assets that the continent has? How do we create industries that do that? The third point is, how do we create industries that are resilient, given the kind of shocks that we are experiencing today from climate change? How do we create industries that are able to withstand, to deal with the long-term risks that we are facing today, and also help the continent transit in a green way as it withstands these shocks? And how do we also take advantage of the huge human capital assets that we have in our youth to support and to harness the potential that this youth has? This is the fourth point on the framing of the Africa's industries of the future. We saw there is a lot of informality. How do we have industries that lead to upgrading of our informal sector, and also whereby our young people are skilled to work in those industries? And lastly, how do we leverage the continental space that we have, and also the spatial space in our urbanization trend that we are experiencing today, taking advantage of the African Continental Free Trade Area, intra-African trade in general, and recognizing that no one size fits all, that each of the country is going to have its own mix of industries of the future based on its endowments and also path dependencies. So this is the conceptual framing for this webinar. And going now to the issues, I think you have already highlighted these areas of reflections by our panelists. We want to think about what should we prioritize? What are those industries for the next 2 decades that are going to raise productivity and also create jobs? What kind of skills? How do we have? How do we design industries that generate decent and productive jobs for our young people? How do we take advantage of the frontier technologies? Are there lessons that we can learn from East Asia, given that that part of the world was able to experience manufacturing-led development? And even up to today, there's a lot of manufacturing that is taking place in that part of the world. And how do we move from extraction to value addition? And how do we use the AFCFTA to create resilience. So essentially, these are the points which sort of basically repeat what you said, Prof. and Flavia. But I hope they have also helped to sort of concentrate the points that our panelists are going to make. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Karinji. And again, thanks, Mrs. Ba, for setting the stage for our panel discussion. We'll now move to our panelists, to our panel discussion to dive deeper into these topics Mr. Karinji just laid out. Let me just tell you that we have 5 panelists. We have as a distinguished panelist, the chairman of the National Development Planning Commission and senior advisor to the president of Ghana on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, who is Dr. Moi Thompson. Dr. Moi Thompson is one of our panelists from Ghana. Another panelist is a senior planner, strategic planning, national planning authorities in Uganda. And the name is Alan Kayongo. Okay, Mr. Alan Kayongo will be our panelist from Uganda. The third panelist is a senior fellow from the John F. Kennedy School of Governance, the Harvard University Kennedy School, and visiting professor of practice at the London School of Economics, Professor Padmashri Gel Sampas. I hope I pronounce your name correctly. Otherwise, I really apologize. Professor Padmashri Gel Sampas will be our third panelist. The fourth panelist is the Regional Economic Advisor for ILO, Andrew Aliu. Andrew Aliu is our panelist, our first panelist from ILO, International Labour Organization. And the last panelist is the Chief of Division of Industrial Policy Research and Statistics Directorate of Strategic Planning, Programming and Policy at UNIDO, Nobuya Haraguchi. Nobuya Haraguchi will be our fifth panelist. Okay, so we'll start with Mr. Alan Kayongo. And the question I'm going to ask you, Alan, is what do you see as main actions to be undertaken to strengthen African position in the global and regional value chain? You know, we all know that Africa is marginalized in international value chains. And what do you see as concrete actions to be undertaken in terms of policy, in terms of investment, in terms of governance and the like, in order to break this secular trend of resources dominating African production and exports, to increase value added and to increase complexity in African exports. And we would really appreciate you being very, very practical and leaning to clearer actions to be undertaken at the policy level in order to achieve these goals. Mr. Alan Kayongo, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Prof. Mbaye. And thank you, UNECA and ADIF for this opportunity, because pretty much you're tackling the main problem point of Africa, which is mainly oriented towards action beyond just research. Now, put in context what you're saying, just last month in Kenya, there was what was called the Africa We Build Summit. And and Alhaji Aliko Dangote, together with President Museveni, who's swearing in today, and President Ruto talked about the same thing. And I recall Aliko said that Africa is in a way exporting prosperity and jobs while it is importing poverty. And pretty much when you look at our dynamics, you get to see that we are so much heavy in terms of exportation of raw, but then we import sophisticated aspects. Now, there is no linear solution to that problem. So the problem to be addressed has gotten to be integrated, systematic, and will entail systems dynamics and whole of part thinking. Fast forward, we can only gain value addition if we sort out what we call the distortions in the factors of production. Principally, if you look at aspects of land, aspects of capital, aspects of labor, and aspects of entrepreneurship, that is where the core aspects of remedy are. For example, when we go into aspects of capital, Africa has a big problem, of capital. How do we design a capital that is responsive to the prevalent problems we have at hand? How do we design capital which taps into the unemployment problem right now? How do we design capital which is Africa relevant? Okay, so it's going to be a very critical aspect. But beyond that, I will come along better on aspects of capital. We can not only discuss the aspects of improving the distortions within the factors of production with aspects of production and productivity. And then that goes beyond just production and productivity, because now you have to embed the aspect of value addition. And that is the whole role which in Uganda we have adopted. For example, when we are designing the 4th National Development Plan, we are seeing and thinking, how do we integrate value addition across all sectors of the economy? Because it cannot be very isolated. But then fast forward, Africa needs to understand and characterize the value addition it is talking about. And this has gotten to be peculiar to different countries and regions, because we cannot pretend to do value addition across all phases. So if it is coffee, for example, for Uganda, how do we transform this coffee bean up to the level where we see we are benefiting? We shall not get so much proceeds if we go all the way to maybe say produce a blended coffee or the powdered coffee. We need to understand and characterize what kind of value addition do we want. So different regions and different countries should concentrate on those products where they have both a cooperative and competitive advantage. But then there are aspects of infrastructure. You get to realize if you analyze the cost of production, that a number of infrastructure deficiencies are bedeviling the African dream to add value onto whatever they are producing. So infrastructure along an array of aspects, be it energy, and in terms of energy, how do you complete the entire value chain? From just beyond generation, you go beyond transmission, you go beyond to distribution. And a number of innovative components can even be thought through in that regard. Why should one country die with the infrastructure demand or component just by its own? It can, even come up with regional pools, electricity pools, or regional transmission corridors. So we've gotten to think beyond that. But there is also infrastructure which pertains to value addition. How do I design and tap into that electricity, which improves aggregation and agro-processing. What about the road infrastructure? How do I join markets across? Because you understand that when you do research, there are some regions which are heavy in terms of supply, and yet others have demand. So how do you integrate that market space? What about aspects of logistics? When you do research, you get to see that 40% of the cost of production is within the component of logistics for Africa, for African businesses. Yet that is almost 4 times higher for the developed countries. Businesses in developed countries only incorporate, a logistical cost about 20% of the entire cost. So how we think through that is going to be very pertinent. Fast forward, governments have gotten to crowd in elements of infrastructure which supports value addition. Why should the youth only be disturbed to come up with, an intervention which is very expensive, yet government can come up with the special economic zones, industrial hubs, which are even well optimized, developed and operationalized to benefit and scale to the aggregate level. Africa should not look at its problems in an isolated manner, because we've seen, even from evidence and research, that there are a number of advantages in regional economic integration. We've gotten to go beyond the level of aggregating Africa as if it is uniform. When you analyze East African dynamics, they are much different from the West African dynamics. So we have just got session of the African Free Continental Trade Area. What are those components that make business case within East Africa? And that is where we should prioritize our effort. What are those aspects that make sense within West Africa? That is the only way we shall break the small percentage of intra-African trade, 15%. Why should we be trading among ourselves to a level of only 15%? Yet we take so much traffic in terms of proceeds to the developed world in terms of trade. Look upon aspects of local content and integrate that within government policy. I can, for example, tell you that the World Bank has done research, and it shows that the aspect of public procurement takes or accounts about 17% of the entirety of African GDP. But at the same time, up to around 70% of the budgets of Africa's budgets goes to public procurement. How are we then integrating some of those public procurements to tap into our local potential? And even in terms of local content, we shouldn't be getting the lower end of local content. So you see, I'm trying to trigger our minds into thinking of the integration of government policies, for example, local content and public procurement. But now we've gone to the level and advent of green technologies. Africa has gotten to realize that we can no longer do business as usual traditionally, because now we have the interplay of improving GDP, but now also tapping into the frontier technologies. If you go to Mintech, South Africa, we should now be talking about green hydrogen, green ammonia, frontier technologies, So the aspect of Africa thinking within the business as usual should be ending. Talk about skilling. How are we skilling our youth within Africa? Are we skilling the youth in tandem to the demands of the market? So we should interrogate.
May I step in for a second? There appears to be someone's mic open and there's a conversation going on.
Oh
So,
dear, sorry.
but not you. I hear something else. So please,
Sorry about that.
whoever's in charge, I hear background
Yeah,
noise.
do you hear me now?
I hear you perfectly, but there's another voice somewhere. There's a mic. One of the mics is open.
Okay, yeah. So I was talking about the notion of skilling, that we should in a way tap and relate the skilling to the demands of the African market. We've gotten run away from the colonial system of skilling, of talking so much good English, but we should integrate that, with the problems we have at hand. If at all, and we see it in Uganda, that the unemployment problem is majorly all about the mismatch between, labor demand and labor supply. And we are trying so much to see aspects on labor supply, aspects on labor demand. How do you tap into that? Now, when it comes to labor demand, we see the notion of the enterprise to be very important. So as African governments, we've gotten to design a number of policies around capacitating the enterprise of the African market. It shouldn't be a matter of formalization where governments, focus so much on formalization to the extent of closing businesses, but rather it should be an aspect of
Dr. Allen,
Yes,
please,
sir.
you have just 2 more minutes to conclude, please. Move to other panelists.
Okay. Yeah,
please.
cool. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So in summary, not to waste so much of your time, the problem, the solution to the problem we have at hand is not going to be linear, but it's going to be one that is integrated and a whole of parts approach, which incorporates aspects of infrastructure development, aspects of skilling, aspects of financing, and aspects of innovation. That is the only way we can have, and we shall have, a sustainable solution to the African problem of transforming from really raw extraction to one of value addition. Thank you so much, Chair. I submit for the next panelist to take on from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Allen, Mr. Allen, for your very important insights. Let me remind to all our panelists that in this primary phase of discussion, each panelist is allocated with only 12 minutes to make their initial remarks. But we'll have another round of discussion, and then you could elaborate more on your different ideas. And now we'll move to our next panelist, who is Professor Padmashri. Professor Padmashri, I would like you to cover an important problem of the current international context. As everyone knows, we are living in an era of polycrisis. To paraphrase John Kenneth Galbraith, we are in an age of uncertainty. We have a lot of crises happening at the same time. As you well know, a health crisis, the coronavirus and the hantavirus pandemics are cases in point. We have geopolitical crisis. We have a climate crisis. We have several types of crises happening at the same time. And in such an age of uncertainty, vulnerability becomes a very important issue. So how do you see African countries building very strong value chains, which are likely to be resilient to all these shocks or similar shocks? So what would be your take on this? The floor is yours, Professor Padmashri.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you quite well.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Ali Mbaye. It's a pleasure actually to join you from Boston for this very important meeting and a very important discussion. Well, you're absolutely right, Professor Mbaye. Africa has been at the receiving end actually of each of the global crises that has been created elsewhere, probably now for upwards of 75 years. And I think that the solution to the current polycrisis is to build a very strong Africa, which is internally resilient rather than externally dependent. I think there is absolutely no other solution for that. And in my 10 minutes, I'm going to actually talk to you a little bit about some of the work that I have been doing with a colleague of mine at Harvard Kennedy School in this regard. So a lot of what I'll talk to you today is based on actually a paper that that I have been working on, which is actually published this week. It will be published actually this week on my Harvard website. And it's on really how, what is the change over the last 25 years globally in terms of technology, knowledge, and development, and what does it actually mean for Africa? And this work, I've been doing it with a colleague of mine, Professor Banji Oyinka, with whom actually we did previously. This is based on an earlier book that we did. It's called Latecomer Development, which was published by Routledge in 2009. At that time, in the beginning of 2000s, if most of us remember who are in this meeting, we were continuously talking about what Africa can learn from East Asian countries and what are the different pathways to development for Africa based on building technology, participating in global value chains, and catching up. And now in this new paper, what we do is we map the shifting geography of innovation. We identify which regions gained or lost relative share of global knowledge investment. And we try to link that to identify these regional pathways and to characterize different models of development and what has happened globally over the last 25 years. Our analysis is based on the last 40 years of technology and knowledge investment for development. You know, just to discuss a very few things from our paper. The first thing that we find is that there's been a dramatic reorganization of the global economy. If you take a look at the R&D expenditure and the world activity between 2000 and 2025. And the key drivers of these shifts are fourfold. The first one is Asia's dramatic rise. So what you see is that Asia has nearly doubled its share of R&D and innovation outputs worldwide from about 29% to over 50%, making Asia the undisputed global center of R&D today. A large part of this is China's massive state-directed investments, but you also have the rise of India, you have South Korea, Singapore. All of this is driving the global economy towards Asia. There's also a relative decline of the West. So North America and Europe have combinedly fallen down from about 70% of R&D investment in 2000 to just over 40% by 2025, okay? And there is persistent minimal share of these R&D activities for both Africa and South America, but definitely for Africa, which represents less than 2% of global R&D combined, and it represents less than 1% of global R&D activity, despite all the global value chains that we have been talking about. And what is fundamentally interesting in our analysis is the geopolitically driven concentration of economic activity. China ranks highest. If you take the concentration of economic activity, China ranks highest in 7 of the 11 global sectors. US ranks high in 4 sectors, and there is no other country that ranks high, you know? And so this points not just to efficiency-driven concentration, which is what globalization was about, but over time, it has actually led to geopolitically reinforced supply chains. And it also points to strategic directionality of economic activities in one direction globally, which is in the direction of US and Asia. So what does this mean actually for the rest of the world, especially for Africa? The first lesson from this, our paper and the analysis, is that knowledge-based assets are central to development. They are central to Africa's development. So whichever industries we are talking about, whether we're talking about traditional industries in Africa or industries of the future, We're not going to make a difference if we don't focus on knowledge-based assets. The second insight is that the geography of R&D is the geography of value chains today, is the geography of high-value production today. So investing in R&D becomes a very essential aspect of thinking about what Africa should do. And this is a very different way of thinking than how we have been thinking about catching up and incrementally innovating and moving forward. The third key insight from our analysis is that there is going to be a wide gap now between all production and high-tech production-led growth, meaning that if you take all production to be low-tech, medium-tech, and high-tech production, and if you just look at high-tech production-led growth, the value from high-tech production-led growth is going to be monumental, hundreds of times more than just focusing in low-tech production. So Africa will parallelly need to move into several product niches, not just stay in low-tech, but really move towards industries of the future, which is actually the focus of this workshop. The fourth key insight, which is very interesting for our discussion, is that this analysis that we have done, it challenges our older wisdom of technological learning and catch-up. It shows that not only there is no frontier anymore to catch up, there is a greater effort that needs to be made to keep Africa in the game, so to speak. And this also means that doing the same things that we were doing before is not going to work because of this geopolitical situation between the US and China and Europe to a large extent, all of these countries are thinking new about industrial policy. And their industrial policy interpretations is not going to create a level playing field for other countries which are lagging behind. It's actually going to create more inequality impacts. So the greater the use of industrial policy in high-income countries to support their industries for their economic interests, the larger the inequality impacts and structural vulnerabilities for Africa. And what are the implications of this analysis? So I'm going to leave you with a few thoughts and we can come back to it in the discussion. So the first implication is there is absolutely no substitute at all for autonomous indigenous capacity acquisition. And in Africa, we have to start thinking new about what this means and what is Africa's strategic strengths in moving towards autonomous indigenous capability formation. Now, some of the speakers here have talked about Africa's population, young population. We should also talk about Africa's mobility to regionally agglomerate its resources and invest into innovation, creating regional hubs, and so on. The second one is that large national companies become very important. In all of the countries that actually moved forward over the last 25 years, in our analysis, we find that they relied enormously on large national companies. Whereas in Africa, the entire space now is occupied by foreign companies. So an important question to discuss is, how do we create an African market for African companies? And how do we build that kind of market space and demand certainty for African companies? A third thing to discuss is to find new levers of resilience, which is really that we have to learn, not just produce. And when we produce, we have to learn more. And those are new levers of resilience, whether we are talking about how to solve Africa's health crisis, how to make Africa come forward in the digital economy, how to make Africa a key player in green technologies, and so on. I'm going to leave you with these thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Pat. Sorry again for misspelling your name. Pat Mashri, sorry. Yeah, thank you for your very, very important insights and also for being concise. So now I'm moving to our third panelist, who is Dr. Nimoy Thompson from Ghana. And Dr. Thompson, I'm just redirecting to you the same question as to Mrs. Padmashri. What can you tell us about how to build resilience in the face of this poly-crisis context we have described, and how do you feel the particular case of Ghana could inform this debate? Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Do I get to project? Can someone let me do that, or I just have to speak with whatever I have here?
Hi, Professor, you can project. Just click more and then share.
All right, I have it here and share. Okay. I reckon you see my screen, don't you? Can you see my screen? Can you see the projection?
Yes, we do.
We can,
Okay,
but it's
proceed.
not on full screen. If you
All
can.
right, so let me put it in projector mode. Is it okay? Great. So I'll proceed on what I have there with the caveats that I recognize the importance of frontier technologies, but I think given our situation, I think foundational technology should perhaps preoccupy our minds more, getting the basics right. And so I'll proceed with that assumption. The issue of frontier technologies obviously will evolve once we get the foundational technologies in place, because we're even struggling to cope with digital technologies because we still don't have the foundations right. Now, I'm supposed to cover three elements: geopolitical, economic, and climate resilience. But I'm not sure that we have a common understanding of resilience, which in different literatures refer to the ability of a system to um, withstand shocks and recover and then thrive, even do better than it was before the shock occurred. So I'm looking at it at those dimensions. With respect to geopolitical resilience, I think product diversification, product and market diversification will be a good way to go so that in the event of any shock to the system, however we define it, a country would not be found wanting. The product and market diversifications alone will help do that. And this will require massive investments in plant and equipment, skills and management development, entrepreneurship development, and productivity, quality improvement, and international competitiveness. Too often we talk about productivity in isolation, but I believe that it should go with the quality of the product for which you have been productive or efficient. And of course, they should be internationally competitive. So a typical example would be labeling, the issue of packaging and labeling in African manufacturing. And a lot of them simply do not meet international standards. So in order for us to be resilient, these are things that we should be doing as a matter of course in the course of economic activities. The other one is economic growth. And here I want us to broaden the definition of economic growth away from the one-dimensional GDP growth that we've all come to focus on and look at 3D economic growth, by which I mean growth in GDP itself, which should be measured by not just by output, but also expenditure-based GDP, provides insights for policymaking that we often do not get from output-based GDP. And of course, structural transformation in terms of the activities, primary, secondary, and tertiary activities for GDP. These are very critical additions to concepts and policy formulation that I think we should focus on. And in the case of Ghana, the Commission, we are actually moving in that direction. Employment creation, it should focus on sectoral, geographical, and demographic dimensions. It shouldn't just be a generic reference to employment creation. And in the case of Ghana, we've just started last week on May 4th, the training of a core of labor economists, 14 of them. Eventually, we're going to be training 30 labor economists across various government sectors, including the central bank, the Ministry of Finance, Labor, Trade, Industry, labor movement, organized labor that is, and the commission itself. We want labor economics to be the language of policy making in Ghana, that ultimately all governments must be measured by the amount of jobs they create, and not just the amount of jobs they create, but also the quality, and of course, wage growth. So this is the three-dimensional approach to economic growth that I think Africa should aim at, with the fourth dimension being the issue of productivity, which is the base deficit in the different types of deficit, trade, budget, and then, of course, institutional productivity deficit. Now, then we move to the issue of transformation. One of my colleagues mentioned formalization. We want formalization beyond registration for taxation, which is what often comes up when people talk about formalization. We want formalization of building the capacity of small industries so that they scale upwards. And in the process, we also modernize the process of production, technology adaptation, and application. Critical infrastructure we have identified to be four as preconditions for economic growth: electricity, and I put a star there because I'll elaborate on that later on. Water infrastructure. Without water, adequate water, there's not going to be industrialization of any kind, especially when we're dealing with agro-processing. You have to wash the fruits and vegetables and whatnot before you can process them. Water constraints remain very serious in most of Africa. Transport and logistics, we've heard quite a bit about that from my colleague from Uganda, and it is indeed a critical infrastructure. In the case of Ghana, for example, the average speed of a truck is only 18 miles per hour compared to the recommended 55 miles per hour. And there are various structural issues and also institutional problems. The way you build your highways, there are a lot of curves, there are hills, they all affect the ability to have efficient transport and logistics infrastructure. And of course, digital infrastructure, which still lags seriously across Africa, making WhatsApp calls, for instance, remain a problem, even within countries. Forget about what happens across countries. And all these should be based on climate resilient infrastructure principles that withstand floods, drought, climate variability, and so forth. Because if you don't do that and you put up the infrastructure for transport, for example, they can easily get washed away in the case of floods or any other natural disaster. So that's something that we need to bear in mind. Institutions are critical. Institutions are the glue that hold everything together. And here we define institutions as laws, regulations, systems, which are procedures and processes, values and norms of the people. These are very critical, both in the public sector and in the private sector. And so are they also in dealing with the issues of resources, human resources. I think it's been mentioned, competencies and meritocracy in particular in the public sector. We heard about East Asia, and Japan and South Korea in particular put a great deal of premium on the quality of the civil service, hiring from the best universities. We don't have that in Africa, so the quality of public service tends to be very low. So do we also see with materials, resources, facilities and resources, financial resources, budgets and plans, and of course, time. Time is the ultimate resource, and yet it gets the least respect in Africa. I'm attending a conference here in Dakar, and it started an hour and 45 minutes late. Typical, anywhere you go in Africa, there's total disregard for time. And every single time you start late, of course, it's a cost to doing a business or actually running your economy. So we need to bear those in mind, institutions and resources. Now here, let me quickly highlight the issue of electricity. Again, it's been mentioned, but I thought I should give the visuals to support that. Electricity is the ultimate, it's similar to what the sun is to the earth. Electricity is to modern economy. Yet South Africa is very high, but you can see that South Africa's electricity consumption per capita, we don't focus too much on electricity access, which can be misleading, or how much you actually consume. South Africa has actually declined, but it's still relatively high, which may explain why it still has the largest economy on the continent. But look at the rapid growth of Vietnam compared to sub-Saharan Africa. In 1990, Vietnam's electricity consumption per capita was actually much lower than that of Africa. And by 2023, it was substantially higher. It's now 2,585 kilowatt hour versus 410 for sub-Saharan Africa. So that flat line, the flat orange line we see, should be cause for concern. Of course, it varies from country to country, but overall, we don't do too well in electricity provision. And if you were to Google Africa from space at night, you will see the visual evidence there. It's quite literally the dark continent, and we need to work on that. This is Ghana's own comparison of electricity consumption with Malaysia and South Korea, 1990 to 2024. Not much different from what we see with the continent. And then we have credit. There's the oxygen for business that needs to be looked at. Sub-Saharan Africa is actually quite high, 44, even though compared to the rest of the world, I think it's over 100%. Lower middle income countries, 35%, and Ghana is just around 84%. And just last week, I actually met with the governor of the central bank and his advisors for us to see how we can unpack this aspect of it. The relationship between growth and employment, we see that here. Even though we've had respectable growth, almost 5%, the absorption rate of the economy has been declining and the unemployment rate is going up. And someone did mention jobless growth, but what we often don't talk about is growthless jobs. When you have high informality, both in terms of production and employment, you tend to get low value activities. And in the case of Ghana, the informal sector contributes only almost 28% of GDP, even though it accounts for 70 to 80% of employment. So value addition, yes, but also productivity to boost output per hour worked, to boost output on the basis of enterprises and all issues related to that. This is a graph that's a little confusing. I'm not going to go through it, but you look at the top right-hand corner, the most productive industry in Ghana is what we call corporate agriculture, which is both productive and also employment intensive. All the other industries clustered in the middle and to the left are low labor intensive industries. And that's the basis of the work we're doing now. These graphs, these are just random graphs I threw in. You see manufacturing added exports as a source of employment. We have a respectable manufacturing as a share of GDP. That's 12% Ghana as opposed to 15% for lower middle income countries. But when it comes to manufacturing of exports, manufacturers as a share of merchandise exports is just around 5.2%, which isn't very good. That's largely because the quality of manufacturers is simply not internationally competitive. So I'll wrap it up here. I hope I was able to fit my presentation within the time allotted, and I'll be more than willing and available to respond to any calls, any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson, for your very nice insight and also for sharing these wonderful facts about the topic we are discussing about. I will now turn to Mr. Nobuya Haraguchi. Nobuya, again, is the chief of the division in charge of industrial policy, research, and statistics within the Directorate of Strategic Planning, Programming, and Policy at UNIDO. Nobuya, how do you see Africa take advantage of the huge experience Asian countries have accumulated over time in the area of industrial policy? Many Asian countries have set up, developed, and brought about bold and effective industrial policies which have elicited tremendous outcomes in terms of jobs, exports, GDP growth, and the like. So I know you have been very active in trying to promote sound industrial policy in Africa. You and I used to team up to support the Senegalese government to lay out its policy to jumpstart the industrial sector. So based on your experience as a UNIDO expert, experience in Africa, but also elsewhere in the developing world, how do you see African countries leverage on these existing experience, instruments, and tools which have proved very effective elsewhere in the world to jumpstart their industrial development process. Over to you.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. Thank you, moderator Dr. Ali Mubarak, and thank you very much, UNECA and ADIF. Yes, the experience of East Asian industrialization, as you know, remains one of the most significant development transformation in modern economic history. Economies such as Japan, the Republic of Korea, Singapore, China, and later several Southeast Asian countries demonstrated rapid industrialization is possible through strategic integration into the global economy, strong state capacity, and sustained investment in productive capabilities. And at the core of the so-called East Asian miracle was a model of export-oriented industrialization that successfully shifted labor from low productivity activities into high productivity manufacturing. And this transformation was driven by technological learning, coordinated industrial policy, export discipline, and long-term state market collaboration. For African countries today, the question is not whether East Asia can be copied mechanically. As you know, the world has changed profoundly since then. The challenge is rather how to adapt the underlying principles of East Asian industrialization to Africans' contemporary realities, including climate change, digitalization, demographic pressures, geo-economic fragmentation, and shifting global value chains. And let me highlight several lessons that remain highly relevant to Africa. First, manufacturing remains central to structural transformation. One of the most important lessons from East Asia is that manufacturing matters because it enables productivity convergence. Technological learning, economies of scale, and employment creation on a large scale. Manufacturing industries create opportunities for learning by doing, technology transfer, and innovation diffusion in ways that few other sectors can match. Historically, no country has achieved sustained high-income status without industrialization, except for some oil-rich countries and small island states. And manufacturing, as you know, has a very unique characteristics. For example, our studies reported in our latest industrial development report, 2026, it mentions that one job in manufacturing tends to create more than 2 jobs in other sectors. And in 2023, manufacturing firms held 60% of green patents worldwide, even though the number of share of manufacturing firms in the total number of firms tends to be 10 to 30% on average in different countries. And countries with strong manufacturing activities, high manufacturing value added level, coped, resisted, or performed better during COVID-19. So they have high level of resilience. And manufacturing accounts for 53% of the global R&D activities. So all these characteristics make the manufacturing sector unique and important for structural transformation. But many African countries continue to rely heavily on commodity exports, while experiencing what many economists describe as premature deindustrialization. And that is a decline of manufacturing shares at much lower income levels than historically observed in industrialized countries. But my studies, which published in 2017, I studied this issue of deindustrialization. Yes, I observed share of manufacturing value added in GDP and also share of manufacturing employment in total employment were declining in many developing countries at the country level. But when I looked at aggregate level, so the sum of manufacturing value added in developing countries divided by sum of the developing countries' GDP, and also some of the manufacturing employment in developing countries divided by total manufacturing employment in developing countries. And then they are not declining. Actually, they have been increasing for developing countries. So actually, manufacturing activity has been increasingly concentrated in large countries. And as I said, this study was in 2017, but my study has been recently verified by studies like Lautier in Structural Change, Economic Dynamics journal article, and also my colleagues at the World Bank, Nguime, Manufacturing in Structural Change in Africa in the World Development Journal. So at the same time, industrialization today should not be interpreted narrowly as traditional heavy industry alone. Modern industrialization increasingly combines manufacturing with services, digital technologies, logistics, engineering, design, and data capabilities. And Africa's industrial future may therefore involve hybrid models, integrating manufacturing and services more deeply than in earlier East Asian experiences. But this linkage between manufacturing with services requires technological deepening. There is also evidence that capital and technology-intensive industries tend to create more linkages with good service jobs. And my second point, export orientation remains essential. East Asian economies succeeded not by remaining inward-looking, but by competing internationally. Some of the countries like Korea proceeded with import substitution and export promotion simultaneously. Export markets imposed discipline, quality standards, efficiency pressures, and technological upgrading. And serving domestic markets alone rarely generate globally competitive firms. Some recent academic studies are pessimistic about export-driven industrialization through the promotion of labor-intensive industries, and instead recommend focusing on domestic service industries. But many African markets remain small in terms of both purchasing power and population. An inward-looking strategy is unlikely to bring about rapid structural transformation. Export orientation also enabled firms to exploit larger markets and economies of scale that domestic demand alone could not provide. And many of the world's fastest growing economies currently, such as Vietnam, Cambodia, and Bangladesh, continue to exhibit strong export orientation. For Africa, this lesson remains highly relevant, but it's true that external environment today is quite challenging. Rising protectionism, reshoring, geopolitical tensions, and geoeconomic fragmentation are constraining traditional export-led pathways. And this means that regional integration becomes even more important. By integrating fragmented national markets, harmonizing regulations, and facilitating regional value chains, African continental free trade area can help African firms achieve the scale necessary for competitiveness and industrial diversification. So regional markets can become stepping stones toward broader global competitiveness, but I would like to here emphasize the importance of trade and investment beyond African continent. For dynamic learning, growth and structural transformation, economic ties with countries with higher income levels would be conducive, as Asia's flying this model suggests. Actually, 85% of African countries are in the low or lower middle income group. For facilitating learning, technology transfer, and capacity development, it's important to participate in value chains led by countries that are more technologically advanced than one's own. And thirdly, East Asia demonstrates the importance of strategic industrial policy. Governments played roles in identifying strategic sectors, coordinating investments, supporting technological upgrading, facilitating access to finance, and managing learning processes. But importantly, these interventions were often performance-based and disciplined by export competitiveness. The key lesson here is not state versus market, but rather how to build capable institutions that can coordinate structural transformation effectively. And for Africa, this means strengthening state capacity and improving policy coherence. Industrial transformation requires long-term planning that cuts across ministries responsible for industry, trade, energy, education, infrastructure, finance, and technology. And too often, fragmented institutional structures undermine implementation. And it also requires stronger public-private dialogue. Governments alone cannot identify all market opportunities or technological constraints. Industrial policy works best when states and firms engage in continuous learning and coordination. In East Asia, groups of competent technocrats, as Dr. Thompson mentioned, groups of competent technocrats provided advice directly to the highest levels of government, and they were largely insulated from political influence. And this facilitated effective interministerial coordination and strengthened public-private sector collaboration and ensured greater policy consistency. For example, Japan's Minister of International Trade, Industry, Korea's Economic Planning Board, Malaysia's Economic Planning Unit, and Thailand National Economic Social Development Board, now it's a Social Development Council. All these ministries and planning units were led by technocrats, competent professionals, and they directly advised the highest office in the government. And they were insulated from the political influence, so they had a consistency over the long term of the planning period. And lastly, human capital development is fundamental. East Asian industrialization was underpinned by massive investments in education, technical skills, engineering capacity, and institutional learning. Countries had high literacy and numeracy rates among the countries at a similar income level. Africa possesses one of the world's youngest populations, and this demographic dividend trend could become an enormous advantage. But demographic potential does not automatically translate into economic transformation. Without investments in education, technical and vocational training, digital skills, engineering capabilities, and managerial competencies, the demographic dividend could instead become source of unemployment and liability. And industrial policy and skills policy must be integrated. Also, infrastructure gaps remain a major constraint, as mentioned by previous speakers. Industrialization is impossible without reliable electricity, transport systems, logistics networks, and digital connectivities. As long as large part of the population remain without access to stable electricity, industrial transformation will remain difficult. And one additional point is that Africa must pursue a different kind of industrialization pathway, one that is green, sustainable, and technologically forward-looking. Africa cannot simply replicate the carbon-intensive industrialization model followed historically by many advanced economies. The global climate agenda, carbon border adjustment mechanisms, and environmental realities make such a pathway increasingly unviable. But this also creates a unique opportunity for Africa. Africa possesses abundant renewable energy resources, significant reserves of critical minerals, and enormous potential in green industries. The continent could position itself strategically within emerging green value chains.
We are running out of time. Could you please conclude? We are really running out of time.
Okay, including renewable energy, technology, and battery minerals. And let me conclude. So Africa's industrialization pathway will not necessarily be the same as East Asia's historical experience. The global economy has changed, and climate constraints are real. Digital technologies are reshaping production systems, and geopolitical fragmentation is altering trade patterns. But fundamentals remain the same. That is how to move labor and resources into higher productivity activities that generate decent jobs and technological capabilities and rising living standards. So industrialization remains central to that transformation. And as I said, the good news is that Africa today possesses important advantages: young population, vast renewable energy potential, expanding regional integration, and growing digital ecosystems. So the task is to translate these opportunities into coherent long-term industrial strategies adapted to African realities. Let me stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nobuya. I think we have completed our round of introductory panel discussions. We are now moving to our Q&A, the Q&A phase of our webinar. I don't know how the Secretariat would like to organize that, but we have around 20 minutes to complete this phase of questions and answers. And I'm not sure how we are going to proceed about that. How are we going to identify those who would like to ask questions? In any case, we would like the audience to be concise while answering questions or making observations, and also not to forget self-introducing themselves, and if possible, indicating those of the panelists whom the questions and observations are particularly directed to. So this being said, I would really appreciate having some direction from the Secretariat as to how we can move forward with these Q&A questions and answers of the discussion. Yeah.
Definitely, Professor Ali. So if participants want to ask a question, they can raise their hands. If you can see it, you can call upon them, maybe 2-3 people at a time, and then we will give them the floor to be able to speak once it's their turn to speak. We can give them speaking access. Thank you. Over.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abergin. So if you want to have the floor, please just kindly raise your hand so that you can be given the floor. Do you think they have the possibility to raise their hands? Because
Yes,
I
we
guess
have.
only the panelists are allowed to use their mics and camera. Even myself needed to be cleared by you in order to be heard and seen. I don't know how the general
Definitely.
public will be able to raise their hands and
They're
yeah.
able to raise their hands. We have one hand raised now from Amadou Gay. And next is Teresa Moyo.
Okay, I don't see them. So
Yeah.
why don't you just take the lead
Okay.
and yeah.
So
Mr.
Yeah,
Amadou
Gay,
and then Teresa.
yeah, if you can hear me, I am an interpreter actually. I cannot be, I can't see the interpreting interface for me to take over from my colleague. So I just want, if Flavia is listening, to kindly add me as an interpreter so that I can take over from my colleague who's been a bit tired.
All right. Thank you, Amadou, for that. We shall
you.
coordinate that now.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right. Teresa Moyo.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Yeah, Mrs. Moy, we don't hear you anymore. Teresa Moyo? Okay, can we move to another participant while Teresa Moyo addresses the issue of related to her mic because we don't hear her quite well, not at all.
Okay, yes, we don't hear Miss Moyo anymore. But perhaps we can take from some of what has been written. So somebody says, greetings from Dr. Vital Karoshi, FAO Ethiopia. And he writes, or she writes, opportunities for Africa. Number one, promote value addition and export finished goods than raw materials, e.g. export processed cashew nuts. Number two, instead of the kernel. So export processed cashew kernel instead of unprocessed cashew nuts. Number two, value addition stroke processing is lacking due to lack of appropriate technologies. Seek technical support from Global South where appropriate technologies are already available. And then she also writes, or he also writes, that investment promotion, preferably through PPP, will be important. We also had a comment from Wandwasin Belete that says that there is a challenge for the African local firms to compete with large foreign companies in capital, technology, management systems, and supply chains. Then what are the main pathways for them to become competitive and grow, even in the presence of strong foreign firms? And I think this can be a question to be posed to the panelists, particularly as Professor Padmashri had mentioned the fact that one of the key takeaways is that we do need to have foreign-grown large companies. What can be done to be able to promote this pathway for African countries? So that's one question. And then another person, Vital Karoshi, writes, true that the challenge of capital has to be addressed. There are a number of ways to addressing these challenges. Number one, joint venture wherever feasible, impact funds, subsidy from government, access to finance from development banks. Technology shouldn't be the bottlenecks as many countries are open to support, China, India, and other BRICS countries. Supply chain can very well be managed by value chain players. So those are the key questions we have for now. Over to you, moderator.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Abergin. So we'll go back to our panelists. Each panelist will be given 3 minutes to address the issues the audience has raised as regards the different points they individually have raised. So we'll be given, we'll give exactly 3 minutes to each panelist using the same order as previously. So we'll start from the Mr. Alan Koyongo, Senior Planner, Strategic Planning, National Planning Authority, Uganda. Mr. Alan Kayongo, you have the floor. You are given 3 minutes to address the issues the audience has raised with regard to your presentation, but also in general. So the floor is yours, Mr. Kayongo.
Yeah, thank you so much, Prof, and also UNECA and ADIF for, creating this co-creation space. One thing which comes through both in the theoretical underpinnings and from practice is that the notion of value addition is one which should be integrated and tackled in a value chain approach. And of course, as I say this, I also align to some of the comments which came through where indeed value addition is critical. But for us to get to the point of saying that we should even, undertake value and export finished goods and all that, we should understand, characterize, and understand the different aspects along the value chain. As an example, you can only get an output based on what you input or what input you provided in the process. So even when we say we shall be exporting processed cashew, we should as well be interested and preoccupied in the input process. What type of cashew seeds are we planting? What kind of extension are we providing? What kind of post-harvest handling facilities are we providing? Because along the way, you lose so much at post-harvest if you don't handle it well. And of course, the same spilled through along. So I think there was a commenter from FAO. I pretty much agree with you, but we should be preoccupied with the how. How do we add this value addition? How do we, process this product? And we should also understand our source markets. Because I may not necessarily be so much preoccupied in the advanced high stream value chain if I'm not as competitive with the other competitor on the world market. That's number one. The number two, true, and indeed we need to tap into the aspects of appropriate technology. And sometimes this appropriate technology needs to be contextualized within our environs. You may even find that this technology is not even outside there. So we need to, first of all, do these collaborations with those who have done something, and then customize those technologies to our local environments. Of course, when it comes to competition, we shall be outcompeted, but we need to be innovative. For example, aspects of technological diffusion then become much important. It doesn't make sense for the African enterprise to compete one-on-one with another enterprise, but that has a signal on policy, because then the African government has gotten to innovatively negotiate some of these partnerships that as a Chinese firm or entity comes, there is a clause for technology diffusion and capacity building, such that now some of the African entities can catch up later on. Lastly, is a whole aspect of global value chains. We may not have developed so much as yet to the capacity of producing a specific commodity in entirety, because even then the developed countries also, are into the global value chain business. So governments, regional economic blocs, private individuals should understand the markets and understand what component of the value chain is critical for them to respectively produce and participate within the global dispensation. With that, Chair, I align with a number of things that my core panelists have presented and looking forward to the implementation of some of these that we've debated. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. We are now moving to Professor Padmashri to have her response to the questions which were directed to the panel and to herself in particular. Professor Padmashri, you have the floor.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. And I think these are very important questions that have come from the audience. So what can we do to build domestic firms in Africa? I think that African firms don't just have a problem of finance. They have a problem of agglomeration. They have a problem of technology, and they have a problem of institutional and innovation support. So I'm going to actually turn this around and say, what is the role of the state in making this happen in Africa today? And I think that if we, for instance, take the lessons from East Asian countries for Africa, and we try to say, okay, what is it that we can glean from those which is still applicable today for Africa? It's actually about the role of the state. Now, the state can do a number of things, and to make African firms big and to make them significant in Africa's own industry, the state will have to do all of this, or in some order or simultaneously. The first one is entry strategy. By that I mean, okay, where is the technology for firms to technologically upgrade and industrially upgrade? It's not so easy to have it, particularly in high-tech sectors now, where there is all of these technology competition between the front-runner countries. The state plays a key role, actually, in facilitating this kind of technology transfer and in pushing for it and in building internal capacity through public research and public institutions. The second one is regionalization. Africa really needs to look inwards. Africa is a big market. It's 1.5 billion people and growing. And it's a huge income purchasing power capacity. So regionalization is critical. And for that, African states need to get together and strategize key products for which the regional market will be a priority for them. And local firms need to be given incentives, and they need to be given preferences in this regional market. The third thing is strategic partnerships. Technology is multifaceted. There's a lot of technology that the state itself can't produce through its public research. And there's a lot of technology that needs to be sourced from the private sector to Africa's private sector. And here the state then plays a role through technology transfer, joint ventures, investments, and other partnerships. The fourth thing is institutional alignment. So there is a lot of need actually for institutional alignment within the African Union, within the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, on key sectors, key industries, giving priority to domestic firms. And there's a lot of lessons on this from what has happened in East Asia in the past, but actually there are key lessons today from what's happening worldwide. Look at the US CHIPS Act, look at what's happening in the European Union, look at what India is doing to build its own semiconductor industry. Look at what is happening in these countries, and Africa needs to institutionally align internally on its key priorities. Then the fifth thing that Africa needs to do to facilitate its own firms is global engagement. The world in the 1970s and the 1980s looked very different from the way the world looks today. And international rules and the global trade architecture is more of a hindrance than a facilitator for regional development of Africa. So pushing for structural change in the trading regime, in the IP regime, pushing back on already existing free trade agreement to have policy space also becomes extremely important to have Africa's own firms. And so I think these are sort of the key areas where I would say the state needs to step in front and center to make sure African firms can survive.
Thank you very much for these very important clarifying points.
Professor Ali,
Yes,
Before Nobuya comes in, Theresa Moyo's question has come in the chat and it's directed to Nobuya. So if you permit, I would read the question so that he can also respond to it in whatever intervention he's about to make. Is that okay?
is that fine?
Okay, thank you, Professor. And Theresa writes, do you think Africa can be effective in industrializing if it adopts the industrial policies that were used by Asian countries in their early industrialization? Some critics caution against such an approach, but I'm not really sure why. So over to you, Prof.
So then let's proceed with Nubuya before coming back to Nee Thompson. So Nubuya, you have the floor. You're welcome to address this question as well as other questions that were directed to you or to the whole panel.
Okay, thank you. It's a very important question. So industrial policies used by East Asian countries in their earlier stages. I mean, industrial policies content should be different from country to country because the country context is different, and also the time period. Now we have very different megatrends, different from the 60s, 70s, or 80s in Asia. So content should be customized for each country's context and also the which fit to current period. But what I want to emphasize is that the industrial policy formulation process can be, yes, transferred to African countries. When I visit African countries and talk to policymakers, they, yes, prepare quite good policy documents and advised by competent experts and consulting companies. But what often lacking is public-private consultation. If the policy formulation process doesn't have very strong this public-private consultation, because government doesn't have all the necessary information, especially now these high-tech industries, digitalization, they need to have close collaboration with the public-private sector in order to collect information, in order to understand the challenges and opportunities. And if they don't have this consultation process, and if they don't have good interministerial coordination, they can produce, yes, they can produce policy documents. But when countries come to implementation stage, they often tend to have a low level of implementation because companies often get surprised. Companies are not willing to cooperate because they are not consulted, and the policies do not reflect good challenges and opportunities that private firms see. So this process, formulation process, can be transferred to Africa, but the content depends on the each African country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nobuya. We'll now move to Nee Thompson. Mr. Thompson, you have the floor to address the observations and questions the audience has directed to the panel and to yourself in particular. Over to you.
Professor Ali, Professor Thompson had to leave for another pressing engagement. But that said, we do have a question from Samson Bempa. And his question is, how is Africa positioned for the energy transition? How are we negotiating to ensure that we do not only let foreigners mine the minerals, but also secure training in all the stages of processing, especially the high-grade processing of these resources into the EV batteries, amongst others we see? Now, it's not directed to any particular panelist, but that's the question that we have. And then The other question from Dr. Benjamin Kimolo, Director Research and Policy. His question to the panelists is, what is Africa doing to their education sector and training to intertwine education and industrialization? We have as many graduates across Africa who have no idea of industrialization. Number 2 question, how do we industrialize the agricultural sector to young people, because there is a feeling across the youth where agriculture is not in their main idea? So those are 3 questions, one on the energy and the use of mines, the second one on how are we ensuring that industrialization and education are intertwined, and then the third, how do we make agricultural sector attractive for the youth? Over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much. So we'll redirect those questions to our panelists. Professor Padmashri, do you have any answers you would like to bring to those questions? Those 2 questions? Okay. So, Mr. Alan Kayongo, do you have any responses you would like to bring to those questions?
Yes, Prof. The question relating to our minerals, around the minerals, we need to be, first of all, very deliberate. Governments need to be very deliberate because we have these rich resources. Some of them are even commercially viable, but we don't know. So governments, first of all, need to be very deliberate. But also, number 2, this is what is going to inform them in all their negotiation aspects. So I keep saying that as we analyze all these facets, we need to understand the entire value chain. And I'll give you best practice for what we are doing in Uganda regarding iron and steel. We need, first of all, to understand in terms of exploration and quantification of some of these extractives. You find that governments are not even sure of the catalog and the quantities and the grade of the extractives they have. So that becomes a number 1 ticket area. Understudy, explore, quantify. What is the measure of your extractives? The number 2, when it comes to production and commercialization, also understand. You are not giving these investors a raw deal. You are not. You should have something structured within those negotiation bills for yourself and for the country. Why should a foreigner come and then take the whole lot of for example, the mineral without necessarily the locals getting benefit? In Uganda, the president, as a best practice, said, no, there is no exportation of raw iron, the billet. There is no exportation of, for example, iron ore in its raw sense. And even colleagues in Kenya had to come and, put a plant at the border in Busia. So, of course, when it comes to regional economic policies, then we're even changing the definition of the export of import of the raw material to a transfer. So the colleague in Kenya doesn't see it as an input, but it is a transfer within the East African community. Of course, thereafter aspects of value addition come into play. Still, for the Ugandan case, when it came to gold, which was being exported raw, the value was 3/3 lower than the one when Uganda said, okay, let us now add value onto gold, and we would recoup so much from a kilogram. Of course, lastly, or second last are the aspects of the human resources. We should scale when it came to the oil and gas sector, for example, in Uganda, where we are about to commercialize and start getting fast oil. For a decade, for 2 decades, our staff our human resources have been undergoing skilling within the dimension of oil and gas. So this is what I was saying, that there needs to be these governments need to be deliberate when it comes to policies, even within the coming up with petroleum funds and all that. You have to re-engineer some clauses to safeguard yourself. That's all I can say. Then lastly, if you allow, is in the aspect of human resources. We don't need to stay locked into the past. We need, as governments for Africa, we need to be very vibrant and alive to the realities. Why should we stay locked into the curricula of the past? Yet now we are evolving. Things are evolving. We have gotten now to the level of frontier technologies, audits, and whichever being done by artificial intelligence. And even this answers the aspect of how do we make agriculture fancy.
Dr. Kayongo,
yes,
we
sir.
have, yeah, please, could you wrap up because we have to.
Yeah, so in summary, we could, in one or another, even incorporate technologies into agriculture to make it fancy and adaptable to the youth. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. So I would like now to close out the webinar, but before doing so, there are two things I would like to do. First of all, I would like to very briefly summarize the main issues that have been dealt with and the main conclusions of the discussions we have had with the panel and with the audience. So Mr. Kayanga has made leapfrogging in the center of his panel discussion. He really believes that technology can be fully used in order to speed up the development process of the continent. But for that to happen, he has highlighted two main issues. First of all, factor cost will need to be put under control, and then local context also, local content can be mainstreamed through public procurement in order to develop local champions to undertake the changes that the continent is expecting from its private sector. Professor Padmashri has put the emphasis on research and development as a way to allow African countries to enter global value chain and to keep being in this value chain. He has discussed the recomposition of the global center of research and development around the world, with the rising share of Asia and the dwindling share of Europe and the US. And Africa, in this context, is marginalized. So she's advocating for African countries to take the necessary step to enter the game and to stay in the game. And according to her, discussions, relying on some African champions in terms of large companies that can support the whole process. And she has also spelled out some policy actions governments will need to take to develop these African champions. Mr. Nee Thompson has put the emphasis on diversification as a key to addressing polycrisis. And he has mentioned several dimensions of such diversification and explained how policy can contribute achieving that. He has underscored the role of critical infrastructure in terms of electricity, water, transportation, the digital infrastructure, and climate resilient infrastructure to make this happen. And he also insisted on the role of institutions in terms of regulatory capabilities, setting values, and developing an effective system to support that. And he also insisted on resources, in particular human resources, financial resources, and the like, in order to make this diversification move to be in place. Mr. Nubuya has explained a lot how industrial policy happened in Asia and how could Africa take profit of the huge experience Asian countries have developed in terms of capabilities and instruments in order to make it happen in Africa. And he insisted that African countries cannot just replicate what has happened in Asia. They need to customize it to fit the current context in Africa, to, in particular, take account of the climate crisis and the opportunities the energy transition is offering African countries right now, but also the challenge related to that. Yeah, and he has insisted on the role the manufacturing sector can play, but also made the point that manufacturing cannot stand alone in this process of African transformation. Services also should be given due consideration, in particular logistics and similar services. And exports should be in the center of the African strategy. So this is what I wanted to say in summarizing the main ideas that we have heard flowing throughout the discussions. Now, I would like to thank very much the panelists for the very insightful discussions based both on expertise and experience they have led throughout the session. Also, thank the audience for being patient. I could see that the number of participants has stayed barely the same throughout the discussions. And lastly, thank the UNECA team for organizing these very important webinar and inviting me in. And I'm sure the very insightful discussions we have had throughout the session will inform the ADIF initiative as it rolls out. So I would like to stop here and give back the floor to the Secretariat. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Ali, and thank you so much to the panelists and all the audience for staying thus far. Like Professor Ali has said, the conversation continues. Whatever we have discussed here will be as an input into a side event at ADIF itself. ADIF will be taking place from June 11 to June 12, and the side event on industries of the future will be on June 12. Please be on the lookout and see how this conversation evolves. Thank you so much once again to everyone and to all my team who have worked tirelessly to make this happen. Thank you, Professor Ali. We really, really appreciate your contribution and your input. Thank you, panelists. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you, and good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're following us from.
Morning, good night, good everything to everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.